For centuries, the Galactic Council believed Earth was a harmless species with only mid-level fleets, small warships, predictable carriers, vessels that never crossed forbidden borders or demonstrated any technology worth fearing. And because of that arrogance, the galaxy settled into a quiet belief that humans were manageable, simple, and safe. But everything changed on a night that never truly ended, when a gravitational spike rippled through the galactic core like the heartbeat of a waking god, sending shockwaves across the star lanes so violently that entire sensor networks went blind. Outposts lost contact with themselves. Shields on capital ships collapsed in perfect synchrony. Navigation systems froze mid-course, and even deep space AI networks stuttered like terrified children. Scientists scrambled to calculate the anomaly, but every equation failed because the numbers pointed to something impossible, an object of colossal mass emerging from a distortion in space where no wormhole, no gate, no cosmic anomaly had ever been charted. And as alarms blared across 40 star systems, as commanders shouted into dead comms, as fleets attempted emergency repositioning despite their crippled scanners, space itself tore open like fabric being peeled apart by unseen hands, revealing a silhouette so massive that every species watching felt their blood turn cold, because the thing that emerged was not just large. It was beyond classification, larger than dreadnoughts, larger than orbital stations, larger even than small moons, a structure whose shadow consumed light and swallowed an entire moon behind it like a monster blocking out a star. The hull was black, void black, the kind of black that did not reflect light but devoured it, a material no scanner could read, no energy signature could identify, no technological category could describe, and as the object drifted forward without engines visible, without emitting heat, without any propulsion signal, it became terrifyingly clear that this was not a ship following the rules of physics everyone knew. This was something else entirely. The Galactic Council scrambled emergency code after emergency code, calling their admirals, waking retired generals, demanding fleet mobilization, but every commander stared at the screen in silent fear because their ships could not lock onto the enormous vessel, their weapons could not calculate trajectories, their targeting systems couldn't even admit the object existed, as if the universe itself was refusing to acknowledge such a monstrosity. Then the vessel rotated slightly, and for the first time the galaxy saw the letters engraved into its endless hull, simple, cold, human letters that sent fear ripping through every species that had ever mocked Earth. Terran Supercarrier. A class name no database had ever recorded, no council intelligence file had ever speculated about, no war strategist had ever imagined possible, because the galaxy was certain humans were incapable of building anything remotely close to this scale, and confusion turned into panic as the council chamber erupted with shouting. Terrans do not have this capability. Why does our intelligence show no record? Is this a weapon? Activate all standard defenses? But nothing worked, because every star system hit by the gravitational spike was still blind, ships drifting helplessly as their scanners tried to recover. And in the middle of this chaos, the Terran Supercarrier simply existed, silent, unmoving, impossible. Alien civilizations watched in dread as light bent around its hull like space was folding, as tiny flashes of blue rippled along its surface like heartbeat pulses, and the fear spread further when readings finally returned for a moment. Just long enough for scientists to gasp at the results, because the ship wasn't just massive, it contained internal space larger than its exterior, a pocket reality architecture the galaxy believed theoretical. Floating megastructure whose interior readings suggested cities, fleets, atmospheric zones, entire artificial continents hidden inside its walls. And as the galaxy questioned reality, the Council tried hailing the vessel, their transmissions echoing through the void unanswered until a single, soft, human-coded message crackled through every comms channel in perfect synchronization, a calm voice that carried the weight of a species that had prepared for centuries. Unknown vessels, please clear the route. You are standing in our path. The simplicity of the message crushed every ego in the chamber. Entire fleets panicked because humanity had never spoken like this before. Never commanding, never dismissing, never sounding like a superpower, but now their tone was absolute, like someone waking from long sleep and no longer tolerating obstacles, and commanders froze because clearing the path meant what? Where was this supercarrier going? What mission required a ship so impossibly massive that it warped space by existing? And while they debated, the carrier moved for the first time. Slowly, silently. Yet its movement twisted the gravitational field so violently that nearby moons shifted, fleets were pushed off course like toys in a storm, and every ship within scanning distance felt their engines shudder as the sheer mass of the Terran vessel imposed itself on their systems. The galaxy realized with rising terror that humans had hidden something they were never supposed to hide, a fleet-class ship whose existence meant Earth had quietly built technologies far beyond Council oversight, beyond galactic treaties, beyond known limitations. Worst of all, no one knew when it had been constructed, where it had been built, or how it had been powered, because no satellite, no spy probe, no infiltrator had ever reported anything close to this scale, which meant humanity didn't just hide a supercarrier. They hid the entire industrial chain required to build it. And as panic spread, the Council attempted a final scan, desperate to know the ship's purpose, but the data they received made every ambassador go pale. Inside the supercarrier were hangars large enough to house entire fleets, weapon platforms capable of erasing star systems, reactors more powerful than Council suns, and a central command node that matched no known Terran architecture, something older, something colder, something designed for a threat the galaxy had refused to believe in. And just when fear reached its peak, the supercarrier broadcast a second message, this time across the entire galaxy. A transmission impossible to block, impossible to decode, spoken in a human voice that carried a final warning. Do not interfere. The Terran supercarrier is on mission status. Omega Return. No one knew what Omega Return meant. No one knew why humanity had released this sleeping giant into the stars, but every species felt the same cold truth. The galaxy had underestimated humans for the last time, and whatever the Terran supercarrier was returning for, the universe was not ready. The moment the Terran supercarrier spoke, a shock ran through every ship in orbit, every alien commander, every civilian listening across the live Council feed, because the human voice did not sound hostile or arrogant. It sounded calm, controlled, almost tired, like a giant waking from a long sleep and simply asking smaller creatures to move aside. And that calmness terrified the galaxy far more than any threat ever could, because no species with weakness speaks like that. The Vorath, the Shulrun, the Dominion, even the mechanical Vexery stood frozen as the supercarrier glided forward without thrusters, its hull absorbing incoming scans and returning nothing, its presence bending space so heavily that star maps glitched and flickered like broken holograms, and the aliens inside their vessels felt something deeper than fear, something like insignificance, like standing before an ancient structure whose age and power dwarfed everything they knew. Hundreds of ships scrambled back to clear a path, but even as they moved, their captains whispered to each other in disbelief. Why didn't we know humans had this? When did they build it? Where did they build it? What else have they been hiding? And the worst question of all, if this is just one ship, how many more exist? Began crawling into every mind. The Council tried establishing communication again, their voices trembling, desperate to show authority, but the Terran supercarrier stayed silent, its massive frame drifting toward a nearby nebulan route like it had memorized the stars, like it had been here before, and even though the aliens could not scan inside, faint blue pulses kept flashing beneath the black hull, each pulse synchronized with the faint gravitational wave it emitted, almost like a heartbeat, almost like the ship itself was alive. Finally, the Council chairwoman, voice cracking, ordered a blockade, hoping to show strength, but the moment the alien fleets shifted into position, something frightening happened. The Terran supercarrier simply changed its angle, and every ship within 100 kilometers drifted aside against their will. Not thrown, not attacked, not damaged, just moved like dust caught in a planetary breeze. And the galaxy realized with horror that the supercarrier hadn't even activated shields or weapons. It was simply too massive, too advanced, too beyond physics for anything to stand in its way. Inside the Council chamber, ambassadors shouted over one another until a security officer played the anomaly recording again. The deep gravitational spike that started all this, and as the room fell silent, the scientist assigned to the anomaly whispered the line that chilled every bone in the chamber. This spike was not caused by the ship arriving. It was caused by the ship waking up. And those words sank into every soul like ice because that meant Earth had kept this supercarrier hidden, dormant, sleeping somewhere no one could find, waiting for a moment only humans knew was coming. Meanwhile, as the Terran vessel passed the blockade without touching a single ship, Internal alarms echoed inside alien bridges as their own systems began pulling data from their logs. Every scan, every attempt to measure the vessel was being overwritten by the supercarrier itself, replacing encrypted council data with a single message written in ancient Terran military code. You do not have clearance. Entire intelligence divisions collapsed into panic, realizing humanity had cracked their secure networks without lifting a single weapon. Fleets tried to stabilize formations as the carrier passed, but the moment it crossed the nebula line, it performed another impossibility. A spatial fold that did not create a warp tunnel, did not open a gate, did not bend light, but instead simply made the surrounding space ripple like water disturbed by a stone. And then the carrier was gone, vanishing. Without leaving a warp signature, without leaving heat, without leaving any trace of propulsion, disappearing like a shadow retreating under a door, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy collectively exhaled in terror, whispering to one another that humans were not just hiding strength. They were hiding purpose. Back in the council chamber, the ambassadors stared at the star map plotting the ship's trajectory, their fear growing as the AI projected the supercarrier's predicted path. And the projection showed something the galaxy never expected. Earth's ship was not heading toward a war zone, not toward council space, not toward enemy territory, but toward a forgotten sector near the edge of the Milky Way, a dark region filled with ancient wrecks and dead signals, a zone once classified by humans themselves as containment territory. And the council froze as the truth dawned. The Terran supercarrier was not going to attack anyone. It was going to face something Earth had kept a secret from the entire galaxy. And as the chamber fell into stunned silence, one terrified ambassador whispered the question echoing across every screen, every ship, every frightened mind in the galaxy. What is Earth going to face that requires that ship? But no one had the answer, except the humans, and they weren't speaking anymore as the Terran supercarrier vanished into the spatial fold. The galaxy spiraled into chaos, governments scrambling to digest what they had just witnessed, scientists refusing to believe their own data, militaries whispering the possibility of a new human empire rising silently in the dark. Yet underneath all the fear and confusion, something even more frightening surfaced inside every strategic mind, the realization that the supercarrier had not shown a single weapon, not fired a single shot, not displayed shields or defenses, not even acknowledged the hundreds of warships surrounding it, and that silence carried more weight than any show of power ever could. Inside the Council's War Intelligence Tower, the best analysts gathered around the holographic reconstruction of the vessel, but every attempt to dissect the ship's technology collapsed into contradictions. Some readings suggested its hull absorbed energy, some claimed the material was non-atomic, others insisted the ship contained folded dimensions inside its structure. Engineers argued until their voices cracked, but no one could agree on anything except one horrifying truth. The Terran supercarrier was built using technology the galaxy did not possess. Technology that shouldn't exist, technology that made everything else look primitive, and as the analysts worked, a young archivist discovered something even more unnerving buried deep. In old human defense records, Earth used to have 3 ship classifications: frigate, carrier, and dreadnought, but ancient documents referenced a 4th category erased generations ago, a class labeled Supercarrier, marked with the words, redacted for Omega-level threat response, meaning humanity didn't build this vessel recently. They had built it long ago and hidden it so deeply that even their allies never knew it existed. Fear turned to dread when the archivist restored a damaged file showing an old Terran admiral standing before a hologram of a giant vessel blueprint, stating, "This ship will only rise if something returns." And those words, spoken centuries earlier, silenced the entire analysis room because it meant the supercarrier's awakening was not random. It was triggered, activated, called forth by something humanity had been preparing for long before the galaxy was even aware. Meanwhile, across alien worlds, civilians gathered around public screens replaying footage of the supercarrier gliding through fleets like they were dust, and everywhere the reaction was the same: fear, awe, disbelief, and something darker. Respect, because for the first time in galactic history, a species had produced something no one could challenge, something so impossible that even the proudest empires could only stare in silence. But not everyone reacted with fear. Some reacted with anger, convinced that humans were deceivers, liars who hid superweapons while smiling in diplomacy meetings, and protests erupted across dozens of planets demanding the Council confront Earth. Yet every time someone suggested aggression, military strategists shut it down instantly, whispering, "If that ship is just one, we don't want to know what the others can do." In the Council's deep core chamber, the chairwoman demanded a full psychological analysis. Why would Earth build something like this? Why hide it? Why reveal it now? And the answer came from the only xenopsychologist brave enough to speak. An old, trembling scholar who had studied humans for 80 years, who whispered, "Humans only hide strength for one reason, to avoid panic." And silence fell because everyone knew what that meant. Humans didn't hide the supercarrier to gain advantage. They hid it because something existed that terrified even them. Far across the stars, the supercarrier drifted through the dark region known as the containment territory, passing the skeletal remains of ancient battleships from extinct civilizations, scanning ruins that hummed with faint, forgotten energy. And inside the vessel, Terran officers moved with quiet purpose, their faces solemn, their voices low, as if they were entering sacred ground rather than hostile space. Deep in the command deck, Admiral Saran Vance watched the dark horizon with tired eyes, murmuring, "So it begins again." His voice carrying the weight of history buried. Deeper than any Council archive, and the ship's AI echoed softly, Omega signature increasing, return probability 87%, causing the Admiral to close his eyes in grief rather than fear, whispering, "We hoped we were wrong, we prayed we were wrong." Because the Terran supercarrier was not traveling toward war, it was traveling toward something old, something dangerous, something waking, and the galaxy, clueless and unprepared, had no idea that Earth had spent centuries preparing for a threat so big that even a supercarrier was merely the first step. Back in the Council chamber, the chairwoman stared at the star map projecting the supercarrier's path, and with trembling fingers she zoomed into the region humans called containment, and when she saw the red zone markings, ancient void rifts, forbidden structures, pre-extinction energy signatures, her voice cracked as she whispered, "Humans didn't hide the ship from us, they hid what they were preparing to face." And the entire chamber went cold as they realized that Terran silence was not hostility. It was fear, the fear of waking something the rest of the galaxy wasn't strong enough to survive. And across the stars, the Terran supercarrier pulsed once more, like a giant heartbeat echoing through the void. A silent announcement that the time humans feared had finally come to us. The Terran supercarrier drifted into the containment territory, the region the galaxy always dismissed as useless dark space. A forbidden zone filled with broken wrecks from civilizations long dead. The Council finally received the first decrypted fragment from their long-range shadow satellites. An image of the supercarrier opening massive hull doors, revealing layers and layers of internal structures that no alien engineer could even comprehend. Structures glowing with blue Terran energy, structures that looked like entire cities hidden inside metal, and the galaxy realized with horror and confusion that this ship was never built for war. It was built for something far more complicated, something humans never planned to explain. Inside the Council chamber, panic grew as analysts discovered the carrier's internal hangars did not house fighters or bombers, but ships shaped for rescue, medical support, and crisis control. Vessels designed not to destroy, but to save, and a chilling thought spread across the room. What disaster was this ship built for? While deep in the dark sector, the supercarrier slowed before a massive fragment of an ancient structure floating in the void, a structure older than human civilization, older than any race in the Council. Its stone like metal covered in runes that no species had ever translated, except the Terrans, because the moment the carrier approached, its AI whispered in a quiet, almost grieving tone, "Omega beacon detected, the door is opening," and Admiral Saran Vance felt his heart sink as memories long buried returned. Memories of Earth's first contact with the containment ruins. Centuries ago, memories of screams recorded in dead languages, memories of an enemy that was not an empire or species, but something that wiped out entire galaxies before the Milky Way even existed. Meanwhile, every alien fleet monitoring the ship saw the structure too late, their screens erupting with warnings as dormant energy awakened across the ruined surface, runes glowing like veins of fire, and the galaxy finally understood why Earth feared this place, why humans hid their supercarrier, why they never asked for help. The thing waking inside the ruins responded not to alien presence, but to the Terran supercarrier itself, like it had been waiting for humanity's return. Inside the council room, one elderly scientist collapsed in terror, whispering, No, humans did not build that ruin is calling to them." And those words shattered the remaining confidence of every ambassador present. Out in the void, the supercarrier projected a massive blue barrier, shielding 3 nearby star systems as the ancient structure cracked open like an egg hatching after eons of sleep, releasing a pulse so powerful it made entire fleets lose power momentarily. And as the galaxy panicked, the Admiral remained silent, his eyes fixed on the expanding energy cloud, whispering in a tone filled with grief. "We knew this day would come. We hoped it wouldn't be in our lifetime." And the officers around him bowed their heads because every Terran aboard the ship had been trained from childhood for this mission, a mission their ancestors swore to pass on until the galaxy was prepared. But the galaxy never prepared, the Council never listened, and humanity never revealed the truth. The alien observers watched helplessly as the supercarrier deployed hundreds of small vessels into the energy storm. Ships built for shielding, analysis, atmospheric stabilization. Actions that made no sense until a single truth hit every strategic mind at once. The Terran supercarrier was not preparing to attack the ancient structure, it was preparing to protect the galaxy from whatever was inside it. And realization dawned like fire: humans had been hiding. Because the real threat wasn't them. It was something only they knew how to fight. The galaxy, finally understanding the scale of the danger, felt a terrifying mixture of shame and fear as they watched the lone Terran vessel stand between the void, the containment structure, and the rest of the universe. And when the ruin released a soundless scream of energy across the darkness, shaking entire sectors, the supercarrier expanded its shields wider, taking the full impact to save civilizations, who had spent centuries mocking them, while Admiral Vance whispered to the dark, "We are here now. Come for us first." And the galaxy broke into silent horror as they understood the truth humanity had carried alone for generations. Earth didn't build a superweapon. They built a guardian for the end of everything. As the containment structure cracked open and the Terran supercarrier widened its shields to protect 3 entire star systems. Panic spread across the galaxy like wildfire because every species finally understood they were witnessing something far older, far darker, far more terrifying than any war they had ever known. And the worst part was that the humans didn't seem surprised at all, as if every Terran officer on that massive vessel had expected this exact moment, expected this exact awakening, expected this exact horror to rise from the void. Inside the Council's emergency chamber, ambassadors shouted useless orders while screens flickered with data none of them could interpret, symbols and readings that made no scientific sense. But one human-born xenologist, half-retired and trembling, translated the runes with a shaking voice. It says, "Seal broken, cycle restarting, target species detected." And the room went deathly silent because the energy pulse from the ancient structure was not directed at the galaxy. It was directed at humans, as if something inside had been waiting specifically for them, something that remembered their genetic signature, something that marked them centuries before the Council even existed. Meanwhile, in the dark sector, the Terran supercarrier released thousands of nanite spheres that formed a massive energy net to contain the spreading anomaly, and alien fleets watching through long-range feeds gasped because even their most advanced empires could not produce technology this stable, this synchronized, this impossibly precise, and yet the humans deployed it effortlessly, like lighting a candle in the dark. On the command deck, Admiral Saran Vance stared at the expanding energy cloud with eyes full of sorrow rather than fear, whispering to his officers, "It's the same signature. The one our ancestors recorded before." They went missing, and the younger lieutenants flinched because the stories of the first Exodus, a Terran fleet that vanished centuries ago in this very region, were supposed to be myth, not prophecy. As the supercarrier adjusted its position, aligning its hull with the rhythm of the ancient pulses, the AI spoke in a calm but mournful tone. "Omega cycle confirmed. Probability of hostile emergence. 92%. And the Admiral closed his eyes, remembering the oath all Terran commanders inherited. When the cycle returns, humanity stands first. An oath that had been passed down secretly through generations, unknown to the Council, unknown to the galaxy. Hidden because humanity feared the truth might cause panic so massive that entire civilizations would collapse before the real threat even arrived. Out in space, the ancient structure finally fully awakened. Its broken walls unfolding like petals of a dying flower, releasing a storm of dark particles that swarmed toward the Terran vessel, testing its shields, probing its defenses, and though the supercarrier's hull held firm, the entire ship vibrated with deep, resonant tremors as if the void itself was knocking on its door, calling for something or someone within. Across the galaxy, millions of civilians watching the live stream fell silent as they saw the Terran ship take the full brunt of the cosmic storm without fleeing, without retreating, without firing a single weapon, standing strong like a lone wall between the ancient horror and every life form that had ever mocked Earth. And for the first time in history, alien children asked their parents in hushed voices, "Why are the humans protecting us?" A question that left even the strongest leaders speechless. In the council chamber, the chairwoman finally broke her silence, whispering, They knew this day would come," and the xenopsychologist nodded with tears in his eyes, saying, "Humans built a supercarrier because they thought they would face this alone." And that single sentence shook the entire chamber because it revealed the truth they had never considered. Earth wasn't preparing for war with the galaxy. They were preparing to save it, and every ambassador felt shame burn in their chest as they remembered centuries of mocking humanity for being reckless, primitive, too emotional, only to realize humans had been carrying a burden no other species dared to face. Back in the containment zone, alarms blared across the Terran vessel as the dark particles condensed into a swirling void, forming the beginnings of a shape, a creature, a presence older than stars, and Admiral Vance whispered through clenched teeth, "So you finally return," while the AI trembled in its digital voice. Hostile consciousness forming, the same entity recorded in first Exodus files. And the entire bridge stiffened as the dark void took shape, because it meant one horrific truth. The thing that wiped out entire ancient civilizations remembered humanity, and it had come back for them first. Yet even as the void expanded, even as the threat awakened, even as the universe trembled, the Terran supercarrier did not move, did not flee, did not falter, standing between the galaxy and the returning nightmare like a giant shield forged from centuries of sacrifice. And in that moment the galaxy finally understood the truth. Humanity didn't hide their strength out of pride. They hid it out of duty. As the void inside the ancient containment structure twisted into a rising shape, the Terran supercarrier locked its position with silent precision, its massive hull bracing against the violent gravitational currents shaking the region like a storm born from the beginning of time, and Admiral Saran Vance stood at the center of the bridge with a heavy, hollow ache in his chest because he recognized the energy signature now forming above the broken ruins. The same frequency recorded in the final transmissions of the first Exodus fleet, the same frequency that had haunted Terran history for centuries, the same frequency that signaled the awakening of something humanity never wanted to see again. And as the swirling darkness rose higher, forming long shadow-like limbs and a face-like distortion that did not belong to any physical species, the AI whispered with a trembling voice that no machine should ever have, "Omega Entity. 97% manifestation, consciousness returning." And the officers around the Admiral swallowed hard because the Omega Entity was not a creature or machine or enemy. It was a cosmic bacterial intelligence, a devourer of star systems, a living void that consumed gravity, matter, light, and consciousness, leaving only dead galactic husks behind, and humans had been the first species to ever survive it, though the cost had been the disappearance of the first Exodus fleet who sealed the entity inside the ruins generations ago. The void being turned its swirling face toward the Terran supercarrier like it was staring at an old wound, its voice erupting across the dark vacuum in a low vibration that bypassed sound, bypassed comm systems, bypassed tech entirely, speaking directly into the consciousness of every living being watching the live stream. A voice full of hunger and hatred that whispered, "You have returned, little fireborn ones," and millions across the galaxy dropped to their knees in terror because no species had ever heard telepathic speech from a cosmic-scale entity before. Yet the Terran officers remained steady, their faces pale but unbroken, as if they had trained their entire lives to stand tall in front of this waking nightmare. The Omega Entity stretched, expanding into a massive storm of black particles that devoured starlight itself, and as its limbs grew, every alien fleet watching through long-range scanners felt their ships tremble. Not from impact, not from attack, but from pure gravitational fear radiating off the creature like waves from an exploding sun. Yet even as the region collapsed into darkness, the Terran supercarrier remained the only object that did not drift, did not shake, did not bow, its colossal frame glowing with blue energy veins that pulsed brighter the closer the entity came, and finally the void being whispered again, this time directly to the Admiral. "Where is the one who bound me last? Where is your first fleet?" And Saran Vance felt his chest tighten as he whispered back, "They are gone, but their promise is not." And the entity's voice deepened with something like laughter, a horrible sound that felt like thousands of dying stars cracking at once, whispering, "Then you will break alone." But the Admiral shook his head, whispering, "No, this time, the galaxy stands behind us," though he knew in his heart that the galaxy was watching in fear, not standing at all. The Omega entity surged forward, collapsing the space between them into a whirlpool of folded gravity meant to crush the Terran vessel. But the supercarrier reacted instantly, deploying massive anchor pylons of blue energy that stabbed into the fabric of reality itself, locking the ship in place as if nailed to the universe, and the entire galaxy gasped as the Terran ship held steady against a force capable of destroying small moons. The AI spoke rapidly. "Shields at 77%, 68%, 59%, holding." And then, for the first time since its awakening, the supercarrier finally activated one weapon. A massive circular aperture on its hull that opened like an ancient gate, releasing a soft hum instead of a beam, a frequency so gentle it sounded like a heartbeat, a frequency older than humanity's written language, and Admiral Vance whispered, "Project Echo begin," because this was the same frequency the first Exodus fleet used to weaken the entity centuries ago, the same frequency humans had sworn to keep alive through generations, and the moment the hum spread across the ruins, the Omega entity recoiled, its shadowy form distorting violently, shrieking without sound as the Terran weapon struck not its body, but its consciousness. Across the galaxy, entire species felt a wave of relief wash over them, but for humanity, the relief came with sorrow. They were using the weapon their ancestors died to preserve, a weapon that cost Terran lives every time it was activated. Admiral Vance gripped the rail, body trembling as the hum intensified, the same hum that had guided the first Exodus into their final stand, and tears formed in his eyes as he whispered, "Hold the line," as they did. While the shadow being thrashed, sending ripples of collapsing space outward, ripping through dead star systems like tearing pages from a book, yet the Terran supercarrier held firm, its shields glowing brighter and brighter, until the entity screamed one final time, "You cannot stop the cycle, little fires," and retreated deeper into the swirling rift, its massive body collapsing inward like a dying storm. But not defeated, not destroyed, only pushed back for now. The region went quiet, the cosmic winds stilled, the containment structures dimmed, and the supercarrier's lights flickered as if exhausted from the effort. But even as the galaxy breathed again, Admiral Vance did not celebrate, whispering with his voice full of pain and truth, "This was only the first. Awakening more are coming, and humanity must stand again." And across the galaxy, leaders who once mocked humans now whispered in shaken voices the line that would echo for centuries. "If humans fear something, the galaxy should run." Asterisk as the Omega entity retreated back into the swirling rift and the cosmic winds died to a trembling silence. The entire galaxy watched the Terran supercarrier floating alone in the dead zone. Its colossal hull dimmed from the fight, its blue veins flickering weakly like the heartbeat of a giant exhausted from stopping the end of the world. And for the first time in known history, every alien empire, from the proud Dominion to the ancient shall run, from the machine-born Vexery to the nomadic Roric, fell into the same stunned silence because they finally understood that while they had mocked Earth for centuries, calling humans reckless, emotional, unpredictable, weak, it was humanity who had stood between them and extinction, humanity who kept the darkness sealed, humanity who inherited the burden of a cosmic enemy no one else had ever dared to face. In the council chamber, the ambassadors stared at the live feed of the supercarrier holding its position in the wrecked containment zone, and the chairwoman lowered her head in shame as she whispered, All this time, they were protecting us. And her voice broke because she knew the truth. Humans had never asked for privilege, never demanded respect, never flaunted their power, because they were too busy preparing for a war the rest of the galaxy lived too comfortably to even imagine. Meanwhile, inside the Terran supercarrier, Admiral Saran Vance stood quietly at the front of the shattered bridge, watching the rift swirl with dormant energy, his expression carrying both sorrow and steel. And the young Terran officers around him laid their hands on the consoles, silently honoring the first Exodus, the fleet that sacrificed themselves centuries ago to seal the Omega entity inside these ruins, a fleet whose voices echoed only through archived memories, their deaths both celebrated and hidden to protect the galaxy from fear. But the moment of grief ended abruptly when the ship's AI, voice weak but clear, whispered, "Omega pulse analysis complete. Entity injured but regenerating next. Emergence projected. Uncertain." And the Admiral closed his eyes, whispering, "Not much time." Because he knew the first awakening was only a test, the entity probing humanity's strength before the true cycle began. Watching from orbit, alien fleets trembled when they saw the Terran ship finally redirect its colossal mass, positioning itself directly in front of the rift like a shield waiting for the next blow. And as the supercarrier stabilized its anchors, another shockwave rippled across space. A smaller one, but unmistakable. An echo of the Omega entity's consciousness brushing against the ship like a warning. "Little fires, I will return." And even though there was no sound, every species felt the message in their bones. Every creature sensed the coming danger. And for the first time, the galaxy turned toward the humans not with fear, but with desperate hope. The Council demanded immediate contact with Earth, sending frantic transmissions begging for guidance, for help, for cooperation. But Earth did not answer right away, because inside the supercarrier, Terran officers were scanning the rift, trying to measure how long they had before the next cycle, calculating how many survivors were left from the ancient ruins. And even the Admiral seemed shaken when he whispered, "If the others wake with it, we will need more than one ship." And the ship's AI responded softly, "Terran Command has been notified, Project Horizon authorization pending." And the bridge fell silent because Project Horizon was the most classified Terran operation in existence. A project whispered only in private rooms, rumored to involve multiple supercarriers or something even larger. Meanwhile, back in the council chamber, an old xenopsychologist cried quietly as he whispered the one truth the galaxy had ignored for centuries. Humans never wanted power. They wanted time. And beyond the chamber, across thousands of worlds, civilians looked at the frozen feed of the Terran supercarrier and felt something unfamiliar. Respect, deep and overwhelming respect, mixed with guilt that it had taken a near apocalypse to realize the truth about Earth. Finally, as the supercarrier's engines hummed with exhausted energy and the rift pulsed faintly with dark light, Admiral Vance opened a channel to the galaxy for the first time. His voice calm, steady, tired, and yet carrying the weight of every Terran sacrifice past and future. This was the first cycle. The Omega entity will return. Humanity will hold the line, but we cannot hold it alone anymore. And across the stars, entire civilizations held their breath as the Admiral continued. "Prepare your fleets. Prepare your people. We will stand with you if you will stand with us." And in that moment, for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy finally understood that humanity was not rising to rule, humanity was rising to defend. And if Earth was afraid of what was coming, then every species in the galaxy should fear it twice as much. The final image of the part showed the Terran supercarrier turning its massive hull toward the rift, blue energy veins glowing brighter, as if the ship itself whispered into the darkness, "We're still here." As the Terran supercarrier held its final position before the dimming rift, its colossal hull lighting up like a dying star refusing to fall, a new kind of silence settled across the galaxy. Not the silence of fear or ignorance, but the heavy, trembling silence of understanding. Because for the first time every species realized humanity had been carrying a burden far larger than themselves, a burden older than the Council, older than the empires, older than the civilizations that had risen and fallen while the Omega entity slept. And as emergency broadcasts spread the Admiral's message across thousands of worlds, civilians gathered in cities, stations, and colonies, watching with wide, shaking eyes as the supercarrier floated like a guardian before the dark wound in space. Its blue energy veins glowing in slow, powerful pulses. The heartbeat of a species who had finally stepped out of the shadows. In the council chamber, ambassadors who once mocked Earth now stood humbled and terrified, asking the admiral for orders instead of giving them, whispering, "Tell us what to do. Tell us how to survive." And Admiral Saran Vance, still standing at the front of his bridge with the rift's cold light shining across his face, answered with a voice that carried the weight of every Terran sacrifice, every hidden preparation, every warning ignored for centuries. "You will prepare your fleets. You will train your people. You will follow Terran defensive protocols. Because when the Omega entity returns, it will not come alone." And that sentence echoed through the galaxy like a prophecy, a truth no species had ever wanted to hear. And as shockwaves rippled through political halls and military bunkers, the supercarrier suddenly emitted a soft, rising hum. One the galaxy had heard earlier during the battle, but now louder, steadier, deeper. And from the underside of the supercarrier, enormous geometric platforms unfolded like petals of a mechanical flower, revealing internal structures that no alien had ever seen before, city-sized hangars, shield arrays larger than planets, and in the center of it all a massive construct shaped like a spear, humming with an energy so old and powerful that even the Omega Rift trembled in response. Alien scientists screamed into their comms, "What is that? What weapon is that?" But the Admiral answered with quiet sadness, "Not a weapon, a call." And then the spear-like construct fired a silent beam of blue light directly into the rift. Not an attack, but a signal, a beacon, and within seconds, the galaxy's deep space sensors detected massive gravitational echoes across distant star clusters, dormant Terran relays flickering back to life after centuries of silence, forgotten listening stations coming online, hidden caches buried under dead moons awakening like old soldiers rising from long sleep, and then the truth hit every species like a tidal wave. Earth had not built one supercarrier. They had built a network, a hidden, galaxy-spanning defensive chain meant to lock down the Omega cycle when it returned, and for the first time, the supercarrier's AI announced something not to its crew, but to every species listening. Project Horizon activated. Fleet Awakening Protocol engaged. And the galaxy froze as space itself shimmered, dozens of Terran signatures appearing all across the spiral arms, small at first, then multiplying, then growing, revealing dreadnoughts, carriers, stealth cruisers, vessels that no alien had ever scanned or recorded, rising like ancient guardians answering a long-forgotten summons. Panic and hope collided across millions of minds as the Council screamed, "How long have these ships been hidden? Where were they? How many are there?" But Admiral Vance didn't answer those questions, because the truth was too heavy and the moment too urgent. Instead, he turned his gaze back toward the rift, watching as faint black tendrils curled outward like the entity was testing the barrier again, regenerating faster than expected, and he whispered softly, "We don't have time," then louder to the galaxy, "We will not survive what is coming if we remain divided. The cycle is older than your empires, older than your councils. It destroyed civilizations far greater than ours. But humanity has faced it before and we will not run." And his voice, steady, tired, unbroken, made even the coldest machine empire feel something like pride. Across the stars, the newly awakened Terran fleets aligned their formations around the supercarrier, ready to stand with it, ready to hold the rift, ready to face a cosmic nightmare with a bravery that made alien soldiers whisper, "How can humans stand like this? Aren't they afraid?" And the answer came when the Terran supercarrier broadcast its final message to the entire galaxy, a message that would become the most repeated line in galactic history. "We stand first. You stand with us. And together, the Omega cycle ends here." And as the rift pulsed one last time, glowing with rising darkness, every Terran ship ignited its engines, forming a shield wall around the supercarrier, and the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity, once mocked, once doubted, once underestimated, rose as the first and final line between existence and extinction, proving once again why the universe should never ignore the small blue world that always fights back.